Hello, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. So Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett has been testifying in one very long, extended job interview to the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And it is pretty clear she's going to get through. Pretty uneventful, not a lot of drama. Her answers were pretty consistent, non-answers. She pulled the Ginsburg rule over and over and over and over and over again, which is basically her saying, I'm not going to answer that because it's political, and I don't want to give you any leanings either way of which way I might rule if a case were to come in front of me. So this has frustrated a lot of people. You're reading the headlines all around and they're saying, oh my gosh, how are we going to put this person on the Supreme Court when we're not even finding out how she feels about climate change or voters' rights or Roe v. Wade, although we kind of know what she thinks about Roe v. Wade because she's a Catholic and she's anti-abortion. So how are we going to put this person on the bench when she won't answer any questions? Imagine having a job interview and not answering any questions. So that's what we're reading a lot in the news. However, my takeaway from the whole thing was it is pretty obvious to me that Congress needs to start doing their job, that it is not the job of SCOTUS to give us our freedoms and to give us our rights, despite what popular belief might be these days, because Congress has failed to move, failed to give us these protections and these rights, and instead it's always come down to the Supreme Court, and it really shouldn't. And Amy Coney Barrett made that point over and over again during her confirmation hearings. I want to play this for you so that you can hear her point. And her point is judges are not the lawmakers. You guys are. Here it is.
Judges can't just wake up one day and say, I have an agenda, I like guns, I hate guns, I like abortion, I hate abortion, and walk in like a royal queen and impose, their will on the world. I interpret the Constitution as a law, that I interpret its text as text, and I understand it to have the meaning that it had at the time people ratified it. Okay. So that meaning doesn't change over time, and it's not up to me to update it or infuse my own policy views into it. It's your job to pass the statutes. It's your job to choose policy. And then it's my job to interpret those laws and apply them to facts of particular cases. And they don't always lead me to results that I would reach if I were, queen of the world and I could say, you win, you lose, or this is how I want it to be, because I just don't have the power by fiat to impose my policy preferences or choose the result I prefer. That's just not my role. I've got to go with what you guys have chosen.
Okay, I wish she would have said that more bluntly to Congress, like, hey, guys, do your job. It's not my job to give the American people their protections. That's your job as the elected body that is supposed to make legislation. You are the legislative branch of the government. Legislate. How about that? Now, listen, she's right on that judges are the ones who are supposed to just, as Roberts put it when he was being confirmed, call the balls and strikes. Judges are the referees. The way it's supposed to work, and I think this is a good reminder to the American people and a really good reminder to Congress that, look, Congress is supposed to make the laws. They make legislation, and they say this is what the people want. We are the elected body by the people. These are the laws that they want. These are the freedoms that they want and the protections that they want. That gets sent to the executive branch, who then signs those pieces of legislation into law, and the judges are supposed to just referee and interpret and tell us what these laws mean. So if a case comes in front of the judges, they say, well, according to the law, this is what can happen based on the law. They are not there to rewrite laws. They're not there to, they're not there to legislate. And there's a difference in the two types of judges. There's an originalist, which is what Amy Coney Barrett is. Most of the conservative justices are originalists. Other justices, the liberal justices, are what are called living constitutionalists. And I'll get into that a little bit later here. But her point of view is, look, my job is just to read the law as it's written at the time that it was written and tell people what that means. So if a law was written in 1850 and now we're in 2020, I'm not going to just fast forward and modernize that law and bring it up to speed. You guys have to do it. So if you want a law that has to do with the internet, and the only law we have on the books is back in the day of, before there was even telephones, what am I supposed to do with this? You guys need to go and do your job and make some laws that have to do with the internet if you want to make those kinds of laws. So ironically, we got members of Congress, and they're sounding the alarm bells, and they're sitting there saying, oh my gosh, your rights are at risk. Everybody's rights are at risk because we've got this conservative justice, and now we're going to have a 6-3 conservative court, and this is the end of the world. Your rights are going down the drain. And this is ironic because, and it's hypocrisy in its finest, because actually Congress are the ones responsible for giving us these rights. Congress is responsible for making these laws and protecting our freedoms, not SCOTUS. SCOTUS was actually designed to be the weakest branch of government, and yet over time has become the most powerful. And that is not what the Founding Fathers designed SCOTUS to be. They really just designed SCOTUS to be a group of legal scholars who knew the law in and out, who would tell us what the laws mean after they've been written. Because we all know laws tend to be thousands of pages long and filled with a bunch of legal jargon. And case by case, things are different. So judges are supposed to take case by case, look at the laws and interpret the laws and tell people what they mean. That's their job. They're not supposed to have power beyond that. So she's an originalist. Other justices on the court are living constitutionalists. This is what's freaking people out. An originalist views the Constitution as written, and they don't, like I said, bring it up to speed. They don't modernize the laws. They say, look, it is what it is. And today we just simply don't have a law to protect you from that thing. And if you want that law, you're going to have to talk to your legislative body. That's what an originalist thinks. And that is something that is very scary to people, because originalists have ruled on cases that have been, typically an originalist ends up ruling very poorly on cases against the will of the people. Okay? Because an originalist is reading the text as written from the time period that it was written. A living constitutionalist, on the other hand, takes the spirit of the law and applies it to modern era. So a living constitutionalist will look at it and say, yeah, okay, I know this law was written in 1850, and I know there was an internet back then, but the basic idea of the law, what they were trying to protect by making this law was XYZ, therefore we can apply it to today's modern issues. An originalist says, no, we can't. It is what it is, and there are no laws on the books for, internet or whatever it might be, okay? So originalists tend to fall on the wrong side of history because they're unwilling to modernize the laws. However, it's a little bit of, I think it just gives them, it kind of does a disservice to them to say that they're not, they're on the wrong side of history, when in reality, it's Congress that didn't make the laws modern enough to allow the justices to be on the right side of history. For example, let's look at the worst Supreme Court ruling of all time, Dred Scott. Now, Dred Scott was, if you're not familiar with exactly what that case was, it was an African-American man, Dred Scott, who was a slave. And he was actually suing for his freedom because he had been taken to free states and living in the free states by his slave owners, and taken back to Missouri where they had legalized slavery. And he was saying, well, because I've been in a free state and I already was free, I should still be free. And it went to the Supreme Court. And at the time, Justice Roger Taney, actually in a 7-2 majority, the justices believed that no, Dred Scott was, according to the Constitution, not a citizen of the United States, and therefore not granted the rights of citizens, and therefore he was still enslaved. The real crux of the terrible aspect of this ruling was the fact that African Americans, even born on American soil, who had never set foot a day of their life in Africa, were not Americans, that they were basically stateless. They had no citizenship, and they weren't protected by the Constitution, the American Constitution, because they weren't citizens of the United States. Now, Dred Scott, for example, Justice Roger Taney was an originalist. So he was reading the text as written and saying, look, the Founding Fathers wrote these laws based, during their era, and they did not intend, they actually had they had a lot of segregation between them and African Americans, and they did not intend for XYZ. So he was saying, look, as it's written, this is what it is. However, Justice Roger Taney himself was very anti-slavery. In fact, he inherited slaves and freed them. He was disgusted by the idea of slavery and was very much against it. But because he was an originalist, he was saying there are no laws on the books to protect these folks. So it is what it is. That's where originalists, even though they might disagree with something, they're just interpreting and playing, calling the balls and strikes, as Justice Roberts says. So that is where it's kind of does them a disservice of being like, oh, these conservatives who are backwards in their thinking. They're saying it's not necessarily an originalist argument would say, I'm not the one who's backwards in my thinking. It's the laws that are backwards. And if you need to modernize these laws. But, the Dred Scott decision did lead, it pushed for Congress to act. Obviously, we had a civil war. There was the Emancipation Proclamation, but that's not actually what freed the slaves. What freed the slaves was the 13th Amendment, and what gave African Americans their citizenship by birth was the 14th Amendment. It took Congress actually moving. It took Congress actually doing their job to protect and free slaves and protect their rights. That's what it took. It wasn't the Supreme Court. It was Congress who did it, finally, and necessarily, because now it cannot be undone. So this is where it gets scary for people. They say, oh my gosh, now what's at risk? We've got a lot of cases that have been decided by the Supreme Court. And now if we have another originalist on the court, when a case comes in front of these originalists and they're the majority, they're going to look at it and say, nothing on the books, guys. So what do you want us to do? Hands are tied. We can't do it. So that's what people are alarmed by. Now, all that means to me is, okay, Congress, then do something. Okay, if they're going to undo all of these things that you're sounding the alarm bells that they're going to be undoing, then why don't you make some laws? Or how about you get an amendment through and we ratify more amendments to the Constitution to give us these protections? How about that? For example, the cases that are at risk of being overturned because they were legislated from the bench. Now, this is going to be a scary list, but bear with me. Brown versus Board of Education. So this is the Supreme Court ruling from 1954 that ordered the desegregation of public schools. That's at risk. I can't imagine, though, that if a case went in front of the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court, I could imagine them saying, look, there's nothing on the books. With a bunch of originalists on the court, I could actually imagine the Supreme Court saying, I don't know, there's no law against segregation. So that would mean after that ruling, people would be up in arms. They would say, oh, the Supreme Court is terrible. It would be a terrible moment. It would be very much like Dred Scott. However, what that would mean is quickly Congress would need to get their butts together and they would have to say, oh, wait a minute. We clearly need to make a law that says you cannot segregate based on race or a variety of other things, perhaps. They might make a law saying that is illegal, and they might make an amendment to the Constitution that continues these protections. Maybe Congress would actually be motivated to do their job. And if not Congress, then on a state-by-state level, I would imagine the vast majority of states, if not every single one, would quickly move to make segregation illegal in this country. I know some of you think, oh, no, not in Alabama. But maybe, hey, you might be right. And then maybe that would mean Congress would need to get together because there are definitely enough states to say, no, we are not going back to segregation. Roe v. Wade is also up for dispute. That's a Supreme Court ruling creating the constitutional right to an abortion. Again, Congress would need to make some legislation. Now, if Roe v. Wade were overturned, that would mean for most women, nothing. Their states would continue on as they've been. Like here in California, nothing would change for women. This would change the lives for women in like Alabama, where they would quickly move to make abortion illegal. That would mean the communities would have to get together, become activists, and advocate their local, their neighbors, their friends, their family members, their local governments, and their state governments to make laws and protections that they want in their communities. It would be a state-by-state issue, and every community would have to get together and tell their local governments how they want to live and what rights and protections they want to have. Or Congress, once again, could get together and do it themselves on a federal level. OBERGEFELL versus HODES. This is the Supreme Court decision declaring same-sex marriage as a right guaranteed. That is also possibly up for up for discussion or debate with the Supreme Court. They ruled on that, and with a bunch of originalists on the court, they might say, actually, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives gays the right to marriage, in which case, once again, Congress would have to go do their jobs. It all comes down to Congress. The justices are not meant to give us rights and freedom. That is actually not their job. The job is squarely on Congress and the executive branch who signs those pieces of legislation into law. So it is not the job of Supreme Court, yet we've continued to sound the alarm bell and to live in fear that the Supreme Court moving to more originalist and conservative views is going to somehow undo our nation and reel us into, a backwards land. That doesn't have to be the case if Congress actually does their job. So it would be state by state, or Congress could actually get off their asses. People would need to become activists. And that's what would happen if we lived in a world where suddenly the justices decided to undo, all of the protections. So that's the big takeaway I got from these hearings was she is going to get through. By all measurements, she is qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. She has the resume. Period. She does. You might not like that she's an originalist. You might prefer her to be a living constitutionalist. You might prefer that she's liberal. There might be a lot of things that you prefer about her, but she does have the resume. She is qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. One other thing that people have been talking a lot about is the legitimacy of these hearings. And look, Trump is president of the United States until January 20th, and he has full power of the Oval Office until that day. And I believe that the sitting president is a fully sitting president, not a partial sitting president, not one with diminished power, but one that has the full power of that office up until the day they don't. And so Trump is well within his rights to nominate a Supreme Court justice, even in an election year. And Senate is well within their rights and obligations and duties to hold these hearings and confirm or deny this justice. Now, I felt that way when it was Obama and it was Garland, and the Senate decided to not hold those hearings. I thought that was against the Constitution and against the way the country should run. I was very much against that. And I'm consistent, and I'm not going to turn around and say, well, now I'm okay with it, and I want them to delay this because it's an election year, because it's not my, because this time it would favor me if I had a living constitutionalist on the bench. I think that's hypocritical, and I don't want to be a hypocrite. And I do think the Republicans are being a bit hypocritical on this one. They should have held those hearings for Merrick Garland, and that's the bottom line. One last point I want to make before I wrap this up is I do have to say that this is a glass ceiling shattering moment for women. It really is. Amy Coney Barrett, whether you like her positions or not, whether you like the fact that she's a conservative or not, this is a big win for women. Here we have a woman in her 40s. She's not a woman with her children out of the house, and she's finally able to go on and have a career. This is a woman that, with 7 children, not just 1, not 2, not 3, but 7, a boatload of kids. This is a woman with 7 children living at home, young children, who has now been able to reach the top of her career, even with those 7 young children at home. That is a huge win for women. Women have been told that they must choose between careers or families. And Amy Coney Barrett shows us that that is no longer the case for women. That is a glass ceiling shattering moment. Like it or not, it's a win for women. One other point is, this one's a little petty, but she has an awful voice, right? I mean, it's high-pitched and squeaky. And this is actually also a win for women, because women who've had higher-pitched voices have been viewed as little girls. They're viewed as unintelligent or just, peppy cheerleader types, and they can't have a mind of their own. And so also I'm delighted to see that there's a woman with a voice like hers, with 7 children at home, in her 40s, who's able to make it to the top of her career against all of those odds that society has painted against us all of this time. So it is a glass ceiling shattering moment. for all women everywhere. And I think we should celebrate that as women, no matter which side of the aisle we are on. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell. Also, if you would like to support the show, the links are down below. I also love hearing your feedback. I love getting your comments and your opinions. I do read all of your emails. I am not able to respond to most of them, but I do enjoy reading your opinions, your thoughts. And many of you send me a lot of really great information, stories, topic ideas. I appreciate all of that. Please keep it coming. Kim@KimIverson.com. Thank you so much for watching.